Hello, hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope things are going well. Just getting underway, but we've got about 2.5 minutes until 2:30, and then we get the lecture started for real. But welcome you guys back, and I hope you all had a good weekend. Hey there, Moises. Hi, Jasmine. It's been good so far. Pretty smooth Monday. Hi, Alicia there. Good to see you too. Hey, AJ. Hey there, Summer. Hi, Brandon. I don't know if you guys were out there watching the Super Bowl yesterday. I know it was a big game, obviously, but kind of a little bit anticlimactic in the sense that it wasn't the most competitive of all games. But, Tom Brady, love him or hate him, he's keeps on winning, I guess. That's crazy. Good to see everybody here. Appreciate you guys being at the meeting. Just got another minute, pretty much. Yeah, the Chiefs kind of fell apart a little bit there. They didn't play as well as they could have played. I mean, they were favored, right? They were supposed to win, so they were defending champs. I guess you just had that Gronkowski, Brady chemistry, whatever. Yeah. Yeah, well, it's always fun to sort of see the pageantry of the halftime game and all the kind of funny commercials and stuff. So, but yeah, the game itself, 31-20, 31-9. I was thinking maybe they could go on a run in the fourth quarter, but it just didn't happen. Good to see you guys. Hi, hello everybody. Okay. Okay, guys. So it's pretty much 2:30. So let's just get things going. Welcome back, everybody. I appreciate your attendance. And as usual, just if you want to put down a little record of your attendance, just say a greetings or any kind of comment at all. And if your screen name differs from your real name, or at least the name that's associated with the class roster, then just make mention of it in the comment. Like I say, I'm not really keeping these records for any specific purpose, but I'd just like to have them in case. So that'll be a constant thing at the beginning of each meeting. Okay, everyone. Well, welcome back. My weekend, yesterday was the Super Bowl, right? But I actually was a participant in a different type of bowl on Saturday. So I was actually a judge for the National High School Ethics Bowl competition, which was kind of fun and different. It's like an event where high school teams from different campuses all around the country, they have a coach and there's a moderator, and I'm one of the 3 judges on the panel, and we're basically supposed to score them based on the quality of their analysis and presentation of an ethical topic and dilemma. And there are all these different cases that they had them report on. Like in one case, should the U.S. have any say in regulating TikTok, trying to protect user data, or no? Another case, if a person had served prison time, do they have a moral obligation to say this to someone that they're starting to date in the early part of the dating relationship? Yes or no? Another case, factory farming. If someone believes that factory farming methods are unethical, do they have an obligation not to eat that kind of meat? A whole bunch of random interesting topics. K-pop, if the K-pop stars are exploited, and a lot of them, it seems, are, is it unethical to take in that media or not? Whatever. So I was just a judge for that. It was kind of fun. Just another little extracurricular academic thing. But here we are. We're back. It's Philosophy 100. I'm really happy to see you guys. And let's just kind of jump back into our notes. I'll bring you back up to speed by first summarizing the major material that we went over on Wednesday last time, and then we'll go on from there. So last lecture, the major theme of the meeting was to go into the cosmological argument. I think we wrapped up the last remaining discussion of ontological argument, and then last lecture we really did go over the cosmological argument in pretty good detail. So just a couple of basic points of summary here to start the meeting. The first argument for God's existence that we all studied was the ontological argument from St. Anselm, and by now I think it's probably familiar. So just to very briefly, it's the one that says God is defined as the greatest conceivable being, and based on the definition alone, he has to exist in reality and the mind, because it's greater to exist in both. And so short of that, he wouldn't be the greatest conceivable being, which would deviate from the definition. So he's got to really exist, because it's greater to exist in reality and the mind, not just the mind. There were different objections to this. One was Gaunilo. He said that if you think this is a fair argument, then what about the lost island? I'm telling you there's the greatest conceivable island, and I have an idea of it. But wouldn't it be silly to say that that's just now proven to exist because, you know, if it doesn't, then it's not as great? We know there's no island like that. So in order to make an argument that something must exist in reality just because we have an idea of a perfect example of it, like a greatest conceivable example of it, that doesn't really carry through to showing that it must really exist. Or if it did, then I guess we would be able to prove the existence of such an island. But never mind that, because we know it doesn't exist. Okay, and then there was G.E. Moore. G.E. Moore said his issue with the argument is that it treats existence like it's an attribute. Like if a perfect being was there, he would have to have existence as one of his features. And so that's how the argument works according to Moore. But Moore says you can't treat existence like an attribute. It's not a predicate, as he says. So in other words, it's not something that you use to describe something. It's not a word that is a descriptive characteristic feature of something. His illustration of that involved a linguistic comparison of sentences which have a predicate versus another group of sentences which are the same except they replace the predicate with the word exist. And so like if you have the statement that some tigers don't growl, no problem, easy to understand. Some tigers don't growl, some tigers don't have that feature. But if you take growl out and you put exist in its place, the same sentence would say some tigers don't exist. And that really shouldn't make any good sense to you because it's kind of like a nonsense statement. Some tigers don't exist, so some things are not things. What is it to be a non-existent tiger? Most tigers exist. Huh? What does that really mean? That there's a majority of them that exist and a minority that don't? We can't count the number of things that don't exist, only the number of things that do. So if I told you that most tigers are orange, instead of like the white tiger, there's a couple of other species of tiger. Most tigers are not white, most tigers are orange. Okay, clearly enough understood, because if I took all the tigers that do exist and I counted them, I would see that there's a bigger number of them that show up orange and a smaller number of them that don't. But I can't do a same kind of counting census of things that do and don't have the feature of existence, right? Because not existing is not a thing that can be counted. Okay, so existence, takeaway point, it's not a predicate. The comparative analysis of the two groups of sentences shows this, so it shows his ontological argument fails. And then there was William Rowe. William Rowe said you can't prove something exists just by defining it as existing. And he thinks that's what Rowe and others have done, what Anselm and others have done in presenting the ontological argument. The definition of God that is found in the argument is existing being. That's perfect. And he says even if you define a being to exist, it still might not exist. He gives the example of magic can. He says, assume this word means existing magician. Good to see you, Nathan, and all the rest. Thanks, guys, for being here. Not to worry if you arrived a few moments late, it's all good. But I was just kind of going over my review, last word on the ontological stuff. William Rowe says, let's imagine that we made up a word called magic can, and it means existing magician. People like Harry Houdini, David Blaine, Penn and Teller, etc. Okay, well, the point is this. Even if there never were magicians, I know I just gave you a few examples of people who were, but suppose, like, contrary to fact, that there never had been any such people. If there never were magicians, we still could have created a word called magican and said, hey, it means existing magician. But in the absence of any real such beings, the word would have the definition, but it wouldn't refer to anything in reality. So if God means existing perfect being, let it be that that is the definition. But in case there is no such thing in reality, then the word doesn't change this fact. To give you another look at the same kind of example, I said, imagine the word unicorn, and let's just pretend that it means existing unicorn. So there the word says existing in the definition. But hey, we know there's no unicorns, regardless of me doing this little game of wordplay. So whether God exists or not cannot be established or proven just based on how the definition of the word plays out. even if the word by definition contains existence as one of its parameters. Okay, then there was the cosmological argument, and that was the major substance of the previous meeting. So I don't know, among you guys, who could tell me even a basic piece of info about the cosmological argument? What's the gist of it? What's the vibe of the cosmological argument? Can you give me any kind of, even just very basic summary or points to consider about the argument? How does the argument work according to you? If you were just going to say a couple of things about the cosmological argument, what is your sense of it? How does it work? How does this new argument try to establish that God exists? What's it based on? Let's see. And then whenever you give me something in this chat, then I'll work with your contribution and add some more detail. So what's the cosmological argument say? And how does it get to the conclusion of God? Okay, so very good. First of all, everything that does exist has to have a cause. Yes. Do you remember what they called that? They say this is known as the principle of sufficient reason. That if something exists, there has to be a cause or an explanation as to what caused it to exist. And good, Kirsten, you're adding to this, that the universe exists because the existence cannot be caused by itself. Okay, both of these are fair points within the argument. Do you remember his first example? He said, hey, imagine if you were walking around and you saw a big sphere in the woods. It's a weird example, but the reason he's pointing it out is because it's weird. He says if you saw something unusual like that, then you'd probably pause and say, I wonder what happened to cause this to be in the woods. Like, how did it get here, and what's the story behind how it got there? So that, he believes, will help you understand the principle of sufficient reason because of such an unusual case. But after mentioning it, he says, to be honest, though, you could say the same. You could ask the same question about even normal, everyday, regular stuff, like the marker here that's in my hand. How did it get here? Like, what caused it to start existing that led it to this case of being in my hand? So whether it's an unusual or a very usual and commonplace thing, we could ask about its origin, and we know that it has to have one because here's the principle. Every positive thing that exists has to have a cause. That's the principle of sufficient reason. Okay, so the sphere thing leads us to that principle. The principle says when something exists, it has to have a cause. Okay, and then the next thing that's mentioned in the argument are two types of truth. Does anybody remember the name of these two types of truths that were stated in the argument? We were told about one type of truth compared and contrasted with another. Just asking for the terminology there. Okay, good, guys. So you're saying, well, David, you're adding a little bit of more detail about the argument. For there to be a contingent truth, there needs to be a necessary truth. Let me come back to that comment, and I'll clarify one thing in general, sort of, but there's one thing about it that's a little off. Isaac, you say contingent truths and necessary truths. Yes, there are these two types of truths. Okay, now, what is a contingent truth? It's something that's true, but it might not have happened. It's something that happened, but it could have turned out differently. Say, for example, Tampa Bay Buccaneers won Super Bowl 55. That's true. That actually did happen. Anybody who saw the game, you would know that the Bucs won. But it's contingent. It's contingent on things occurring within the game that could have played out differently, you know? So I don't know, if he didn't connect with Gronkowski on those 2 first-quarter touchdowns, then maybe we are looking at a different result in the end, and it's Kansas City that won. That's just one example, but fill in the blank. There's all kinds of random others. I could say you're watching this lecture. That's contingent because had something else happened to you earlier, then maybe you would not have been able to attend the lecture. Same with me. Okay? Another example of a contingent truth. Kim, you want another one? Student, somebody, please give me another one. There's infinitely many of them. Even you writing that question down is a contingent truth. But I digress. Let me hear another one from another student. Don't let me talk. I want to hear from you. Tell me another contingent truth. Let's all put one out there. Okay. So I'm looking in the chat. Sometimes they pop up on my phone faster than on the desktop, so that's why I'm doing this. Kim, to clarify, is it basically a possibility? No, it's more than a possibility. It's something that did happen, though. Something that's possible might not have happened. Like, I possibly could have died this weekend, if I got into a dangerous situation. That's possible, but it didn't happen. So it's something that did happen, but it possibly could not have. Does this make sense to you? Okay, so Tina, COVID being this serious. Yeah, I guess the disease itself, if it's still COVID-19, its identity would have still been dangerous in whatever exposure that it has to people. But I guess maybe you mean like how widespread it is. If there would have been effective mitigation at the outset of the outbreak, then maybe it wouldn't have become this widespread problem that killed so many hundreds of thousands of American people. So yeah, something that did happen, but we can imagine it playing out differently in a different contrary to facts scenario. Alan, if you get food poisoning from eating a certain type of food, you could have potentially avoided it if you didn't order that food. Yes, a good example, Alan, but all I would say is it's a hypothetical scenario. I would point out that it's a good choice to give examples of things that are just demonstrably actual facts. But of course, people do get food poisoning, so you give a type of scenario that does occur. David, the Big Bang. Okay, well, we're getting very heady and philosophical there. Yeah, that's the larger issue that he's pointing to, that the existence of the whole universe, as much as any other event, is contingent. So just as well as me and you existing, the universe's existence would have to have a cause according to the same principle of sufficient reason. Getting into a car crash, but if you forgot your wallet at home and went back, it could have been avoided. Yeah, good example. Carson, had the Chiefs left tackle not been exposed to COVID, their O-line would not have been destroyed. Okay, another fine example. Yeah, so they were destroyed, but maybe they wouldn't have been had events played out differently. Okay, so Kim, I hope I'm not losing your point here. The point you ask about is, what's another example of a contingent truth? The contingent truths are everything that's true that could have not been true in a different possible circumstance. I mean, you were born, Kim, and you might not have been born if your parents never met. So had that chance meeting not occurred, you wouldn't be in this meeting, you wouldn't even be part of the universe. So you, me, everything around are existing things that could have failed to exist in a different sequence of events. On the other hand, there are necessary truths. Now, necessary truths are things that are true but could not possibly be false. So they're not contingent, they're necessary. There are things like 2 + 2 is 4, or there are 4 sides on a square, or trigonometry facts, logic facts, math facts, geometric facts. Good, Kim, thank you, I'm glad. So now we've got the distinction. Necessary truths can't be false. 2 + 2 = 4 is not just possible, it's necessary. And that's different from a contingent truth, which is something possible, but which happened to, yes, occur. Okay, so from there, the point is that this principle of sufficient reason pertains to the contingent truths. Because when something's contingent, it might not have happened. And so that means that whatever caused it to occur, there has to be such a cause, such an explanation. So if everything contingent must have a cause, the next point to be mentioned is that the universe exists, and it's true that the universe exists. According to the author's judgment, this universe that exists is contingent. So meaning that it might not have existed. Just like the Bucks might not have won, maybe the universe, under different circumstances, wouldn't even be here. Not just talking about some things in it, but the whole thing. So if the universe is contingent and there has to be a cause, the last question of the author is, well, what could this cause be? And he tries a few things before settling on the conclusion that it can only be a necessary creator like God that causes the universe. First, he says, could the universe cause itself? And that is quickly ruled out, because nothing that is a part of the universe, or even the whole thing, can be the cause of its own being. In order to be the cause of an effect, you have to be separate from the effect and before it. So if the universe causes itself, then it already exists to give the effect from the cause. And that does not make any more sense than saying someone gave birth to themselves, right? You'd have to be already there to give the birth of yourself, which is totally absurd and contradictory. So the universe can't cause itself. So it's something other than the universe, which is separate and apart from it. Well, could the cause of the universe be something contingent? Who knows the answer to that question from the author? Question, could the universe be caused by some contingent thing? What do you think? Well, maybe what you think is one thing, but what does the author think and why? Could our universe be caused by another thing that is contingent, like the universe is? Let me know, and tell me why you think that's the answer. Okay, Tina, no. Yes, that's right. It could not be that the universe is caused by something contingent, but why not? Just No, but why not? Because it would be infinite, correct. Because in case the universe was caused by something that is contingent itself, then the question reappears. What caused this contingent thing that didn't need to exist, but which did exist and which caused the universe? Which would just push us back to another cause, to another cause, to another, unless and until we finally arrive at a first cause which is not contingent. You understand? A contingent thing could never be the first cause, because a contingent thing is something that comes from somewhere else, something that depends on something else for it to have happened. So however far back the cause-effect chain goes, it has to reach its first link with something that does not depend on anything else. In other words, the first source of everything has to be something that is necessary, not contingent. And he says that's just God. God is the necessary being, the being that is true but could not possibly not be true, the being that exists and could not possibly not exist. And from this necessary being, the whole universe and all things within it are caused to exist. So everything contingent depends on the necessary being, but the necessary being does not depend on anything else. And that's how the whole story of causation and the existence of the universe goes. So according to the cosmological argument. Okay then. Yeah, and the infinite regress is claimed as impossible. Yes, so very good comment, Kirsten. All right, so we have more arguments for the existence of God to continue to develop. We've now learned about the ontological and the cosmological. There's another one that's also, I think, very well regarded and respected. And so in my view, they're kind of like the big three, if you'd like to use a phrase like that. The big three, like three of the major arguments for the existence of God in the Western tradition and really throughout the world. So this third argument is called the argument from design. Okay, the argument from design, that's next on our list. And it is sometimes known as the argument from intelligent design. I've heard it also labeled that way, but we'll sometimes also called the teleological argument. So if you like the technical kind of names, ontological, cosmological, this is teleological. But I like the simple stated design argument. Okay? Now, many versions of this argument have been written in history, but we're looking at one in our book that comes to us from this British philosopher, William Paley. Okay, now William Paley lived from 1743 until 1805. So, you know, the late 18th, early 19th century, that's his lifespan. And this comes from a book that he wrote, let me get the date, I think it's from 1800. Oh no, it's from 1804. Yeah. So from 1804, he wrote a book. It contains the argument from design in it, and this has been reprinted in our anthology, so we're now looking at it. He was an Anglican priest, so a priest in the British Christian church. Therefore, as you can guess, he obviously is a big believer in God if he's a priest. But he doesn't just want to believe based on faith alone, as with the other arguments. He thinks that there's a way of proving the existence of God just using reason and thinking about it logically. So let's try and understand the basics of his argument then. Mr. William Paley, argument from design, lived during this time and wrote it in 1804. Okay, so we've already encountered a couple of cases in philosophy where an author tries to make a point by asking you to consider a random hypothetical scenario. Not random, but a hypothetical scenario, some kind of contrary to fact situation to entertain in a mind, to get your mind thinking about the argument. So here again, we have one of those hypotheticals. It's not imagine an island that's perfect. It's not imagine walking around and seeing a sphere. But ironically, it is about a person in the woods. And imagine a person walking in the woods, but in this version of this paper, it's not that one stumbles upon a sphere, but rather a watch, like a watch like this. So imagine that you're walking through the woods, just having a nice little wooded hike, and you see a watch. You see a watch on the forest floor, okay? Now, if you imagine that happened, You encounter a watch on the forest floor. One thing you would know for sure about this watch is that since it's a watch, it had to come from what type of origins in the beginning? Like, what's the only way that a watch could come to exist? What kind of situation has to happen for a watch to be the end result? And because he's saying that knowing this is a watch, you know at least this much about it, that good, Kim, that it had to come from some type of person. Something with intelligence has to be the cause, the ultimate origin of the watch. Yeah, that someone had to make it. Yeah, Kim, now you might think someone that walked in the forest, sure. But the point I'm asking is just like, what caused it to form in the beginning, right? How did it become a watch? So you know that it had to be a person that made it. Okay, now let me follow up on that. How do you know? I mean, what makes it so clear and obvious that some human person or something with an intelligence created the watch? How do you know that the watch didn't just randomly come together by luck? How do you know that the watch isn't something that just fell into place through chance and through just haphazard circumstances? What makes you so confident that it has to be an intelligent thing that creates a watch and it's not just some chance, confluence of random events? You say it's a human invention, David. Okay, but what if you've never seen a watch? I mean, even if you've never known that humans make them, you'd know that it was invented by some intelligence because, okay, this is good, Ishmael, because it's complex, the complexity of it. That's right. Looking at a watch is looking at something that produces a function, the function of time telling. And the inner workings of the watch have to be so carefully arranged in order for it to perform that task. So it seems as if nothing that is that complex with that kind of specialized function could ever come about just through randomness. Okay, it couldn't just be like a tornado blew through town and it kicked a bunch of stuff up and a volcano went off and somehow it fused a bunch of elements just randomly and a watch was just laying on the sands of the beach after that. No one created it. It was just a pure product of chance in nature. You see, no one would think this, and that's his point. Knowing that this is a watch, that it has this kind of inner complexity that allows it to perform a time-telling function, that can only come about through intelligence, through design, through a thing that has set out to make a watch for the purpose of telling time. Okay? So let me read his words, and then you'll see his way of putting it, okay? So he says on page 31, in crossing a heath, suppose I pitched my foot against a stone and was asked how the stone came to be there. Now he starts with a stone because it's like a random thing that has no purpose. So he says, if it's a stone, I don't know, maybe it has always been there. And he says, I might possibly answer that for all I know, to the contrary, the stone has been there forever. Nor would it be easy to show the absurdity of this answer. But, and now we get the real example, but suppose I found a watch upon the ground, and I was asked how the watch got to be there. I would never think of the answer which I gave before for the rock, that for all I know, it's always been there. But why wouldn't this answer serve for the watch as well as for the stone? Why isn't it as legitimate in this case as in the other case? For this reason, and for none other, namely, that when we come to inspect the watch, we perceive what we can't see in the stone, that its several parts are framed and put together for a purpose. That is, that they are so formed and adjusted as to produce motion, and that motion so regulated as to point out the hour of the day. That if the different parts had been differently shaped from what they are, of a different size from what they are, or placed after any other manner, or in any other order than that in which they are placed, if they weren't put in that specific order, then either no motion would have been carried on by the machine, or none which would have allowed it to tell time. And then he goes into like some of the myriad details of how watches are actually constructed in terms of the little coils and springs and gears that turn so that the clock face shows the accurate time in a reliable way. Okay, so let me look at the comment here. Ishmael, couldn't you argue that humans are that complex though? Oh, well, yes. I mean, that is the argument, Ishmael. I hope we're not losing you on this. His point is that the watch is definitely complex, so it comes from a person because it takes a mind, it takes an intention to take all the components of the watch and just so fine-tuned put them together so that they will actually do their job. So he's making the principle here, using the watch as an example, that if there is something with a complex function or purpose and an inner complexity of parts, then that has to come through intelligent design, and it can't just come through random chance. Okay, so let me put that here. His point to take away from the whole watch example is like the first thing he gives. And sort of the outcome of the example is this. If something has a purpose or function, and internal complexity, etc., then it must have come from an intelligent designer. Okay, so that's the point of giving us this watch example. Let me come back to your comment here, Ismail. The argument is that something that complex can't come from nature. Well, God is going to be like the stand-in for the intelligent human that makes a watch when we think of nature itself. Yeah? So humans come from God, and all the things of nature that perform a function come from the intelligent creator God. We're a couple steps downstream from that, Ismail, but you're already, I think, anticipating where he's heading with the argument. So if I'm understanding you correctly, you were wondering, well, how does the analogy carry over to people? The watch is something man-made, but a person is something that's just natural. His claim is that just as much as the watch, though, there's no way to explain the existence of all the little body parts and how they precisely function in their environment, how you have eyes that see, how you have a nose that smells, how you have a digestive system that processes food, how plants can carry on photosynthesis. He would argue that these are parallel to the complexity, purpose, and function that is seen in the watch. And so the same reasoning, he thinks, carries over to the example of natural things, not the watch. If the watch must have come from an intelligent designer because it's just too complex to happen randomly, then he wants to say the same of the works of nature, that they had to be the issue from an intelligent designer, but the intelligent designer of nature is not a human being, it's God, him or himself. Okay? So it's not really that, I think, on a correct understanding, Ishmael, you'd see that he's not necessarily contradicting himself. He just wants to insist on the point that things with a purpose and complexity have to have a creator. And if you accept this point, then he'll say, okay, now allow me to expand on that. We are things too that, like the watch, bear the hallmarks of complex design. And that's why we should be thought of as having a creator too, except the watchmaker for us is God. Okay, good. Thank you for your contribution. Anyway, here's the principle that we've been led to appreciate through the watch scenario. So let me just take us a step back and let's make sure we're all on the same page. He says, imagine you saw a watch in the woods. Well, you know it has to come from something intelligent because no watch can just happen randomly. There's no way a watch with all of the fine-tuned adjustment of parts could possibly sit there carrying out the ability to tell time unless it was originally the result of some kind of intelligent manufacturer working as a watchmaker. Okay, so when you have a thing like a watch, there's got to be a watchmaker. That can't happen randomly. They're too complex. The purpose is too detailed, etc. Now, after that, he has a couple of points that I want to make sure we don't get lost on. He says there are certain factors that would not cause somebody to doubt that the watch has a maker. All right, so that's stated in like the double negative, so it sometimes could be a little mental tongue twister. Factors that would not cause doubt that the watch did have a maker. But let's walk through it and I'll try and make it clear. So factors that would not cause you to doubt that the watch has a maker. Okay, so here's some factors that would not lead to that type of doubt about the origins of the watch. And he lists these as Roman numerals like 1 through 8. So he raises 8 of these factors. I'm not going to discuss each single one because I think some of them are more essential than others, but I'll sample a couple that I thought were important. One factor he says that would not lead to any such doubt is suppose that the watch, you've never seen a watch being made. So that's one. You have never seen a watch being made. Okay, so let me explain. Many of us have watches, or if we don't have one, we know about watches and we've seen them. But probably a lot of us haven't literally watched. I don't want to use the word too many times. Probably not a lot of us have ever seen with our own eyes a person making a watch. Like we've not actually looked at the assembly process in like a watchmaker's workshop, correct? I mean, some of you maybe have. If you're got a lot of time and you like this kind of stuff, you could have gone online and looked at like how it's made and like seen an actual factory production process of a watch and see how it goes down. But most of us probably just use the watch as the final product, and we don't pay much attention to the workings of how they came out of the factory, okay? So many of us are probably in this category. We have never seen a watch being made. So if you can relate to this, here's what he's saying. Even if you have not seen a watch being made with your own eyes, does that really make you question whether it came from a watchmaker? No, right? You still know it came from a watchmaker. You don't have to literally see it being made to know this. And why does it remain totally obvious that it had to have a maker, even if you haven't seen one do it? What makes it obvious? Well, it's the same point that he's already mentioned, because the watch has all this complexity and this ability to perform the function of telling time. That's all you really need to know that it had to have a maker. It's not like a person could reasonably say, I've never seen a watch that was made with my own eyes, so how do I know that it was made by somebody? You're telling me that it's got a purpose, but I haven't seen it being made, so I'm going to doubt that. He says this is totally unreasonable. Nobody would ever doubt that the watch has a maker merely on the basis that they themselves had not seen it been made, okay? So this is not a legitimate reason to doubt that the watch has a maker. You've not seen a watch being made, and you know that this watch that is on my wrist has come from a watchmaker just because it carries on the function of telling time, and it's created in order to do that. So that's one of the factors that doesn't lead to such doubt. Here's another one. Suppose that the watch is flawed or broken somehow. The watch has a flaw. Once again, no serious reason to deny that the watch has a maker. So imagine that when you see this watch wherever you find it in the forest floor, you pick it up and you look at it and it's not working properly. Like suppose that the hands on the clock face just keep ticking back and forth, like one of those old broken school clocks. It's not showing time correctly. So you got a watch in your hand, but it is a busted watch. Okay, so if it was broken, would that make you start to doubt that it has a maker? Like, no, right? Nobody would think, well, I mean, this particular watch is not functioning correctly. So maybe this one did fall out of the sky through like lightning strikes and volcanoes happening. No way. Even if a watch is broken and doesn't properly function, it still shows all the marks of having been designed for that function in the usual case. Okay, so like he's giving the example of a watch because think of when he wrote this. It's 1804, and that would have been probably one of the more impressive small pieces of human technology that he could have referred any of his readers to. But now it's 2021, and we could use a lot of different examples. What if I say you find a laptop in the forest? It's broken. Would a broken laptop in the forest make you think, well, maybe this is a spontaneously generated laptop because only the ones that man made are the ones that work? Obviously, whether it's working properly or it's not in working order, it's evident enough that it was constructed and designed for a certain computing purpose. And so it remains obvious that it has a maker, even if it had a flaw. Okay, so here are two things that don't cause serious doubt about it having a maker. Another one is this. Say you don't know how it works. So a lot of us, we have certain technological items, but many of us, unless we really take a special interest in it, don't know how they exactly work. I drive a car and I like my car, but I'm not 100% knowledgeable as to how all the precise machinery inside under the hood works. lot of people, mechanics and auto enthusiasts, they know all those details. You know how the engine does its thing, and etc. Me, I just know you pump gas in it, you turn the key, whatever, and it drives. But I know that it's a car that had to have been created by a person, even though I'm not really aware of exactly the details of how it works. Same with the watch, right? You find a watch, and maybe you don't exactly know how it works underneath, the hood, as it were. You just know that it's a watch. But even if you don't know how it exactly functions, you don't need to know that it had a creator, okay? So it's not like you're going to say, well, I don't know how it works, so maybe it doesn't have a creator. That's not legitimate reason for doubt. With my watch, it's got a digital clock face, and I would have to know a lot about electronics and stuff to even get the barest understanding of what's really going on inside that allows this watch to tell time for me. So look, again, if you've never seen a watch being made, who cares? You still know it has a maker. If the watch has some type of flaw or is broken, still, that doesn't leave any room for doubt that it has a maker. You still know it has a maker despite this. And again, if you don't know how a watch works, that also is no significant reason to doubt that it had a maker, because it's evident that it has all this complexity and it was put together for a purpose. Okay, one last thing. Nobody would think that it does not have a maker because somehow it happened through chance events in nature. So, yeah, so nobody would say that a better explanation for the watch is just pure luck, things falling into place, becoming a watch just with no guiding hand and no principle behind it. This is no significant alternative to the maker hypothesis. So these points are raised only in order for the author to demonstrate that there's no good reason to doubt that the watch has a maker. Even if you try to spin your wheels and think of reasons for doubt, there's no significant reason to doubt that the watch, which has this purpose, this function, and this little internal complexity, there's no good reason to think that it does not have a maker. Even if you've never seen a watch made, even if they have a flaw, you don't know how they work, or even if there are others who might claim that they just happen randomly, none of these would defeat our presumption that it has a maker. Why did he digress to make these points? Well, let me explain, because in a moment he's going to say that the works of nature are kind of parallel to the watch, because they also have internal complexity and function and purpose. So they must have an intelligent designer as well, and that's God. But imagine that somebody says, well, I've never seen God, and I've never seen him craft the works of nature. So having not seen that, I have doubt that he's the maker. Well, he says you wouldn't have doubted that the watch has a maker even if you hadn't seen it been made. It was enough reason to know it had a maker just because it has complexity and a function. So that's not a good reason to doubt that God's the maker of nature. Also, sometimes in nature, things have a flaw, okay? Some people are born blind. Some people are born, with congenital birth defects. So the way that the body part ought to function, the eye for seeing, it's not working. But even when these flaws occasionally exist, they don't demonstrate that there's no kind of intelligent design, because the structure of the mechanism is still in the kind of order that it would be to produce the common function in the usual case. You don't know how all the works of nature exactly do their thing. Do you really know how vision works? Have you studied biology enough to learn about the science of vision, how the rods and the cones inside of the retina process the visual information in the brain? Many of us don't know those facts. And of course, there's a whole prior history behind the modern era where they were totally unknown. So even if we don't know how the brain or the heart or the digestive system or photosynthesis works, it's still clear enough that it produces a purposive function. And he thinks, once again, that doesn't cause any serious doubts that it had a maker. And finally, he argues, who would think that the intelligent creation of nature is less reasonable than saying it just happened randomly? Nobody would have thought a watch could happen randomly. So how could the nervous system or the vertebra or whatever in nature? Okay, so there's only one last little piece to his discussion here, and we've been building up to this. He leads us into an analogy now, and he says basically that the watchmaker is to the watch as God is to the works of nature. He, in particular, gives us one example that's pretty concrete. He says, think of the eye, okay, like the eye that's in your head. The eye, of course, has a function as well, and we all know what that function, that purpose is. The eye is there for vision, to see. And he says, if you consider the eye, it's even more amazing and impressive the way that it functions to produce vision, and the way that all the little biological parts of the eye have to be just so precisely fitted and arranged for it to allow the function of vision to exist. So if we thought that a watch had to have a maker because it's way too detailed to just happen randomly, then why would we not say the same of things like the eye or the digestive system or the circulatory system? These are things which, perhaps even more so than the watch, show internal complexity and a clear purpose and function that they do exhibit. So in the end, we've got an analogy here, guys. The watchmaker is to the watch as what is to what? Can you complete the analogy? The watchmaker stands to the watch as what stands to what? Just help me finish that thought. Because he's saying the watch is analogous to certain things, and the creator function of God, well, the creator function of the watchmaker to the watch is parallel as to how God stands to nature. That's right. Now, Isaac, you say as God stands to humans, yes, but not merely humans. It's claimed by the argument that there are natural processes that are beyond just the human part of nature, like photosynthesis, the weather, the respiratory system of weather, the weather cycle. So God stands to nature as the watchmaker stands to the watch. The common link is that the works of nature, if we focus on those that have purpose and function, they have to have some kind of intelligent designer behind them, just as much so as the watch would have to have. Okay, so let me read it from his text and see what he said on this. He says here, so every indication of design which exists in the watch exists in the works of nature, with the difference on the side of nature of being greater and more, and that in a degree which exceeds all computation. I mean that the design of nature surpasses the design of man in complexity, subtlety, and curiosity, and still more, if possible, do they go beyond them in number and variety. Yet they are not less evidently mechanical, not less evidently designed, nor less evidently accommodated to their purpose or office than the most perfect productions of human ingenuity. I know no better method of introducing so large a subject than comparing one thing with another, an eye, for example, with a telescope. So a telescope is obviously man-made, and the eye comes from nature. He says, as far as the examination of the instrument goes, there is precisely the same proof that the eye was made for vision as that the telescope was made to enhance vision. They're made upon the same principles, both adjusted to the laws by which the transmission and reflection of rays of light are regulated. So he says that since it's very evident that a camera or a telescope has to be created by a person, well, this is before the era of the camera, so he refers to the telescope, but today we can use both examples. Such a thing as the camera is a way of getting a capture of an image in light. The eye can do the same, and it's something that happens naturally. Nobody would think of a camera that it happened randomly or just through chance series of events. There has to be a guiding hand that wants to construct the camera so that it can take pictures. So he says, in nature, many things exhibit an order of complexity and function that rises to the same level or even surpasses the level we see in the work of human beings. So if it takes a man or a woman with intelligence to create a watch, then he thinks it takes some kind of intelligent force to also be the architect of the things in nature that have purpose. And so what could possibly be the master watchmaker of nature? It has to be something that's outside of nature, capable of crafting it, and that would be like a supernatural, divine creator God, and that's where he thinks the argument for God's existence can be given. So this is another argument for the existence of God. It's a little different from the others. Just to compare them against each other, the ontological argument relies crucially on the definition of God as the greatest conceivable being, and that's where it takes its main premise from. If that's the definition, the claim is that he has to really exist because that's part of being great. Then you have the cosmological argument, which says that if something exists, there must be a cause for it. That's the principle of sufficient reason. And if we apply that principle to the universe is something that exists, so it must have a cause, and the only cause that there could be would be something different from the universe that doesn't depend on anything of its own. So that's the cosmological argument. Now we have this design argument. And it's basically saying that when there's something in the world that has complexity, a purpose, and a very complex internal assembly of parts, that has to be the result, the product of an intelligent designer. We would know this right off if we saw a watch, a cell phone, a computer, you name it. I mean, all kinds of other stuff, a simple light bulb or a lamp. We would know that that cannot have been the product of an unguided natural process because it's too complex and functional, and the parts have to be put together in just such a way that only an intelligence could have done it. So he says, compared to those works of man, an eye, the echolocation of a bat, I don't know, all the natural adaptations that animals have to their environments, the body parts, eyes, ears, nose, etc., they carry a function, and they do that due to the very detailed complexity of their inner workings. So he says the analogy is true that just as the watchmaker can only explain the watch, only God can explain the workings of nature that have a similar level of complexity. Okay, so we've now taken a tour of 3 of the big major arguments for God's existence, but as you guys know, that's only half of the game, really. We also need to know about all the criticisms on the other side so that we can have balance and see 2 different perspectives. So we're going to now take that next step and try to talk about what some of the major criticisms of these arguments have been. So what this is taking us into now is the writing of Ernest Nagel and his article, Does God Exist? Ernest Nagel, okay, so this is an American philosopher of the 20th century. He lived from 1901 until 1985. And he was born in the Czech Republic, but he immigrated as a child to the United States, so he's a U.S. citizen, and he was a big-time philosopher of science. He taught at Columbia University for most of his life, and he also got his PhD there, so he's really well-known figure in the legacy of Columbia's philosophy department. And Jasmine, let me see here. There's much more to learn about the afterlife and what is believed to happen. Oh yes, it's true. I mean, the questions never end, right? But it's, I think, part of the privilege and honor, really, of being a human being, being able to even contemplate such big questions. Sometimes it may strike us as a burden, but I think it's more interesting to be a human than to be an animal who merely lives out their life without the ability to reflect on what's really the bigger picture. So yeah, that's, I think, some of the value of philosophy, and that's why it's so deep and enriching over the years. But yeah, so to Ernest Nagel from 1901 through 1985, he wrote this book in 1959 called Philosophical Concepts of Atheism. And he himself is an atheist, so he's not a believer. So obviously he finds all the arguments for God's existence to be deficient. And in this paper from 1959 called Does God Exist?, he states what he finds to be the major objections and criticisms of all the big arguments that we've studied. So I'm going to kind of just walk you through what he finds to be problematic about the different arguments. So he first states problems with the cosmological argument. So I'll just put that here as the label for the notes. Problems with the cosmological argument. The one that we studied last time and reviewed today about everything having to have a cause. And the universe, therefore, must have a cause, and it must be God. Okay, so in reply to this argument, he has a couple of major problems that he points out. First thing he does before stating the objections is just to sort of repeat the argument one time. And so in repeating it and restating it, here's how he puts it, very, very brief summary. He says, one of the oldest intellectual defenses of theism is the cosmological argument, also known as the argument from first cause. Briefly put, the argument goes like this. Every event must have a cause, so, little diagram, every event must have a cause. So an event A must have as cause some event B. Let's say this arrow is a causation arrow. It points to the effect from the cause. So if A exists, it has to have B as a cause. But if B exists, it must have cause C, and so on. But if there is no end to this backward sequence of causes, and it just goes on forever, there's an infinity sign. If it goes back to the infinity, then the progression would be infinite, and in the opinion of those that make the argument, an infinite series of events is absurd and impossible. Therefore, there must be a first cause, and the first cause is God, the necessary being, that is not caused by anything else. So that's a summary of it. But after just repeating what it is, he gives us his problems. And some of these objections to the cosmological argument may have struck you as we were discussing it. So if so, now you can kind of connect with his point. One of the problems is this. Why doesn't God have to have a cause? Okay. Okay, so that's the first kind of critical point. The argument is saying two things that might appear to be contradictory to each other. One thing that's said in the argument is that everything has to have a cause, right? And that's why the universe has to have some kind of cause. But if everything has to have a cause, why would we automatically then withdraw the same claim when we start talking about God? It seems that if everything has to have a cause, God would have to have one too. So how can one consistently say everything has a cause, but God has no cause? These 2 points seem to kind of contradict each other. If everything has to have a cause, then God is a thing, and you would think he would have to as well. On the other hand, though, so do you understand the objection? Someone's pointing out that it sort of seems contradictory, inconsistent, maybe hypocritical to say everything has to have a cause, but no, not God. Which one is it? Is it that everything has to have a cause, or everything except for God? Well, if you say that God does not have to have a cause, and that's kind of where the argument replies, God doesn't have to have a cause. If God does not have to have a cause, then why couldn't just this thing have no cause instead? And then we wouldn't have to assume the existence of God at all. What do you think I'm mentioning here indirectly? What I'm going to write on the board. If God need have no cause, if there could be something that's not caused, say God, then why not just suppose that this is not caused by itself? Namely, what am I referencing? If there could be something without a cause, like the argument claims about God, then why not just assume or consider that blank has no cause? What's the blank? Just think about it. It's not supposed to be the most difficult point, because keep in mind it's all just about where did everything come from. So if the argument says God does not have a cause, then why couldn't we simply consider that nature, or good Jasmine, the universe has no cause? Okay, so if God need not have a cause, if there could be something with no cause, then why couldn't the universe have a cause? Okay, so what I wrote here is the question. If there could be something with no cause, then why can't the universe have no cause? Yeah, so you're correct, Jasmine. He's pointing out two things in these separate quotations here. First of all, the argument says that everything must have a cause, and that's how it gets us to accept that there's a God, because God is the thing that explains the existence of the universe, because the universe has to have a cause. Well, if everything has to have a cause, even the whole universe, then why doesn't God have to have one? But if you say that God does not have to have a cause, then we go to the next problem. Well, if you say this, then why not just suppose that it is the universe itself that has no cause? If the universe is the self-caused necessary being, then there's no need to assume or postulate the existence of something separate from the universe that brings it into existence. I mean, in a way, I kind of see the point here, because considering the existence of the universe versus the existence of God, the existence of the universe is obvious and it can't be denied. I mean, here you are, look around, this is the universe. But the existence of God is a debated subject that some people at least don't agree on. So if you were asking where is the necessary being that causes everything to exist, at least with the universe, it would be indisputable that that candidate for being a necessary being does exist. In the case of God, you'd have the extra complication of having to assume that he's outside of the universe and then pondering the mysterious question as to how he can relate to it from outside. So, another problem. Suppose that everything has to have a cause. Why not God? Suppose God does not have a cause. Well then, it seems like something doesn't have a cause. Maybe the universe could just be that something. Okay, and two further problems that he mentions just now. Okay, so I'm going to create a little space, but I'm going to erase the header here. So these are still all problems with the cosmological argument to add to the list. Another one is just the question, why does everything have to have a cause? Right, so you could try to stop the argument in its tracks by just rejecting the principle of sufficient reason. You could say, many things have a cause, but why is it that everything has to have a cause? Couldn't there be certain things at least that don't? Maybe you could agree that particular individual things within the universe must have a cause, like me and you. Our cause was our parents conceiving us back in the day. But maybe the entire system of reality, all of space and time, is not the kind of thing that has to have a cause. You know, so you could also push back on the argument by saying, wait a minute, I'm not so convinced that everything has to have a cause. If you can't convince me of that, then there would be no need to postulate the existence of God as the explanation. And then there's this one last critical point, which I find to be quite interesting. One more problem that is mentioned is this. He questions whether an infinite regress is really impossible or not. He mentions that maybe it's possible for there to be an infinite regress. So, is an infinite regress really impossible? Maybe not. So kind of rhetorical question. I'll put the rhetorical answer, maybe not. So let me explain this final point here. One of the key steps of the argument is this. The universe can't be caused by something contingent because that would simply lead to an infinite regress of causes, and that's absurd, that's impossible. Infinite regress? Yeah. Well, we should know though, what is an infinite regress? It's a sequence of causes that has no beginning and that goes on infinitely. So suppose that the universe was caused by a contingent being. You remember the cosmological argument where we said, why couldn't it be a contingent being that causes the universe, right? When we summarized that this morning, remember that we said that if it was a contingent being which causes the universe, then that would have to have a cause of its own. And this would continue and continue forever until the first cause somehow was not something contingent, right? Good. So it's denied that the universe could be caused by something contingent because it's going to lead to an infinite regress, which is considered impossible. Now the critic enters the scene and says, I don't follow you. I don't think an infinite regress is impossible. Maybe it could be that our universe is caused by something contingent, and on to infinity. Maybe this is not impossible. So here's why one might think that it is a live possibility. The concept of actual infinity is something that we actually do understand in a certain way through our studies in mathematics, set theory, logic, and trigonometry. So let me give you a few examples. Take the geometric line, okay? Say this is a line segment here from point A to point B. So this is the line segment AB. Okay, question. Is there a midpoint between A and B? Going back a little studies in geometry review. You see the line here. Can I designate a midpoint? Or just is there one on the line? Yes, clearly there is. Every line has a midpoint. It's the point that bisects the line into half. So let's label it M. Okay, so now let's consider this new line segment, A to M. Is there a midpoint between A and M? New question. So if we just focus on the line segment, yeah, and again the answer is yes. So let that be M prime, the midpoint between A and M. And how many times could I keep asking this question and receive a new value? You know, will I ever exhaust the range of points until there's no space in between the 2 points? No. For any 2 points on the geometric line, there's an infinity of extensionless points in between them. And so you cannot exhaust the linear density of the line. Each point on the line has no dimensions in terms of length. So this is one way of thinking about actual infinity. Between even A and M prime, there are just as many members in terms of there being points as there are between A and B. So like a subset of the whole line contains the same number of points as the larger sequence does. That's the idea of actual infinity expressed geometrically. We could also do that mathematically. Take these two numbers on the number line, 0 and 1. Is there a numeric value that's half between 0 and 1? Yes, it's 0.5. Okay, so you follow me, we could do this again. I could say, well, is there a number that's between 0 and 0.5? Say 0.25. What about in between 0 and 0.25? Okay, 0.125. And we could keep on doing this to infinity because there's no way of exhausting the range of real numbers on the number line. You could simply expand the decimal position out and subdivide by another value of 2, and you would generate another distinct value on the number line. So that means that there are just as many numbers in between 0 and 1 as there are in the entire natural number sequence. And that's another way of expressing actual infinity, something inexhaustible. So in a way, the point is raised here, couldn't it be that the timeline of universe history is also infinitely dense in the same way that these geometric or number lines are? So no matter how far back you go, there will always be another point in time or another event that leads from the current event to a prior event. If this is something that we can grapple with mentally, then he says it's actually perhaps not impossible to consider the hypothesis of an infinite sequence of causes. And if that's the case, then there's no real creator or anything. There's just the causes themselves going on forever. So that's another way of trying to resist the force of the argument. Let me read then Mr. Nagel saying it in his own way. Okay, so here's what he says. The argument is ancient. It has impressed many generations of minds, but it's nonetheless weak. Let's set aside the question whether every event has a cause, because we could ask that question, but suppose that we agree with that. Even if we agree, isn't it inconsistent to suppose there's a first cause as a way of getting away from an infinite regress? If everything has to have a cause, why doesn't God have to have one? Okay? The standard answer is that he doesn't need one because he's self-caused. But, okay, if God can be self-caused, why can't the universe be self-caused? Why would we assume a God transcending the universe to bring it into existence? On the other hand, is it really inconceivable and absurd an infinite series of regressive causes? No one would admit this who is familiar with the modern mathematical understanding of infinity. So that's the last point he makes, and that's why he finds this argument a little defective. Okay? So we've heard now at least one person's set of objections to the cosmological argument. The next thing that he does in his paper is he states his objections to the ontological argument. I don't want to spend much time on that, though, because his objection here is much similar to the one that was written by G.E. Moore. And if you remember, G.E. Moore objected to the ontological argument by saying that existence is not a predicate. That's kind of similar to what Nagel says here in this article. But he uses a slightly different example. So let me just mention his example. He gives the example of a $100 bill. Okay, so take that unit of currency. I think you all know what I'm talking about, the big current day blue-faced Benjamin Franklin $100 US bills. Now, I don't know if you have one with you or not, but if you do or don't, doesn't the definition of that unit of currency remain the same? It's not like the definition of it changes depending on whether a person has one of those banknotes or doesn't. So what he's pointing out here is that the definition of something is completely separate from the question whether it exists or not. We can define something and understand its definition without ever saying, by the way, it's present right now, versus no, it's not present and does not exist. So if I have the $100 bill and it's in my wallet, the definition of the $100 bill is the same as if I don't have one and it's not in my wallet. I liked his example, but I can think of a better one to sort of just riff on that for a minute. So allow me this slight variation on his reference. Take dinosaurs, okay? So dinosaurs don't exist today. They've gone extinct, obviously. But the definition of that life form can be stated, you know, like in some type of science or biology textbook, you know, what the phylogenetic criteria is for something to be a dinosaur. So the definition of dinosaur is the same whether they exist or whether they are extinct. If tomorrow we build Jurassic Park and we somehow genetically engineer new dinosaurs to come back from the old DNA specimens that we've preserved, bringing them back is still not going to change the definition by itself. So the definition remains stable through all these changes, whether the thing's coming into existence, going out of existence, the definition doesn't change. So he says that's another way of thinking about the point, that you would never include existence in the definition of something because it's separate from whether it exists or not. It's separate from its description, I should say, whether it actually exists or not. Now I'll read his point, okay? He says, the substance of the criticism is that it's just a confusion to say that existence is an attribute. Although the word existence can be grammatically used in a sentence as an attribute, there's no real attribute that's being predicated of something when we say that a thing exists. So to use an example, when we think of $100, we're thinking of the nature of this sum of money. But the nature of $100 remains the same, whether we have one in our pocket or not, whether we have a $100 bill or not. Accordingly, we are confusing grammar with logic if we say that some characteristic is being attributed to the nature of $100 when we say that a $100 bill exists in someone's pocket, okay? So to say of something that it exists adds nothing nor takes anything away from its basic definition. The definition is what it's like, and existence is whether it's there or not. Okay, so I just said that his objection is running very similar to the one given by G.E. Moore, albeit with a slightly different example. The commonality is that existence is not a predicate. And here's just another maybe simpler way to show it, not relying so much on linguistic comparison as much as a common sense judgment that when you say of the $100 bills you don't have one, you're not offering a different understanding of the concept than a person who says I do have one. Okay, so finally there's only a little bit more in here in Nagel's work. Nagel next wants to present his criticisms of the design argument, the argument from design that we spoke of today. So what are his problems with the argument from design? Okay, problems with the argument from design. The first thing that he says is this, that in the argument from design, it says that, sorry, let me get my notes corrected. Peachy distract me a little bit. Yeah, okay, so what is the real reason that we are so certain that the watch could never come about except through the action of a designer? The design argument of Paley really revolves around this comparison of the origins of watches and similar things like those compared to the origin of natural things like the eye or the wings of the bird or whatever. And the point made by the argument, just to repeat it again, is that if something has that much of a detailed purpose and function and all the little parts have to be just so finely tuned for it to do it, then there must have been an intelligent creator to get it going. That's what we know about a watch. So why would we say anything differently about, you know, the eyes that are in your head or the bird's wings or whatever other natural things that also perform a function due to very complex parts? Nagel now says this, that analogy between the watch and the eye is a bad analogy. The reason that it's bad is because although the watch and the eye do both have a function, so that's the way they're being compared and made comparable, although they both have a function, the function of the watch is not the real reason that we know it has a designer. Okay, so he mentions that the real reason we know the watch has a designer the watch has a maker is because we humans make watches. It's not because it has a purpose. Okay, so like we definitely know 100% that the watch has a maker because we are humans and we know that we're the authors of watches. It's not because it has a purpose, it's simply because we are in position to say that we create watches since we literally do it ourselves. There are all kinds of things that are made by human beings that don't perform any specific purpose. And we would also know that they have a creator for the same reason. Take, for example, one of those little snow globes that you could buy at the souvenir shop, right? You turn it over and it looks like snow's falling on a little scene in the woods, whatever. Does this really do anything? No, it's just a little memento, a memorabilia, a little, souvenir that you might keep with you to remind you of having gone out somewhere, taken a trip, or as a gift. But it doesn't itself literally perform a function. Nonetheless, wouldn't we know that it has a maker just because we humans make those snow globes? So, in effect, the purpose of the watch, which is being leaned on so heavily in his comparison, is not the key distinguishing factor that lets us know that it has a maker. Now, if we slide over to the example of the eye, another way that the analogy is weak is that concerning the eye and its function, there are other viable explanations of how it acquired such a function without having to assume the existence of any intelligent designer. Okay, now maybe some of you have got the idea in mind what I'm referring to here. What is the sort of different scientific explanation for how things in nature can arise with a purpose, but without a God? This is a widespread theory of how things come to emerge in nature with a function. And what do you think I'm mentioning when I'm saying this without giving the name? The other sort of scientific or naturalistic way to explain the presence of purpose and function in nature. Yes, natural selection and evolution, Darwinian biology. So that's the next thing he says. The eye and the works of nature can also be explained without assuming a designer, and that is via the theory of evolution. The eye, let me make this clear. The eye and its purpose and its function, right? Can be explained without assuming a designer. Through evolution. So these are the two major points of criticism that he raises against the design argument. He says the comparison, the analogy given by the author between the watch and the eye is a bad comparison because although they do both have a function, the function of the watch is not essential to the knowledge that it has a maker. We would know that whether it had a function or not merely on the basis that we literally make watches ourselves. And then concerning the eye, although it has a function, we can explain this function without assuming anything about an intelligent creator, namely the widespread and prevailing scientific theory of Darwinian biology. I mean, you guys probably studied it a little bit in high school, but just a very brief crash course. According to Darwin, given a set of life forms, those that have adaptations which equip them better for survival, random mutations, etc., that equip them better for survival, they're going to survive in larger numbers, passing their genes on to their next generation that they give offspring to. And so over a long stretch of geological time, the beings that have gained those adaptations are going to more successfully pass their genes on, so those become selected for traits. And the beings which don't have them in such great numbers die off because they don't as successfully reproduce and pass their genes on. So this, according to Darwinian theory, is what gives rise to things like eyes, ears, nose, etc., wings, over a long span of time, and it doesn't require the assumption of any kind of divine intelligent force driving the whole process. So, the argument is only as good as the analogy is between the watch and the eye. And although we can say that a watch and an eye both bear a function, the function of the watch is not critical to knowing it has an intelligent maker. And the works of nature that have a function can be explained without assuming any intelligence. So he says that looking at it this way, the analogy starts to kind of fall apart a little. Okay, now we've reached the end today, so I thank you guys for hanging in there and staying a minute late. I'm going to close the class for today's lecture, and we'll resume on Wednesday. We're almost caught up in the notes. I just have to finish a couple of last things that Nagel said, and then we'll continue from there by talking about the Pascal's wager and some objections to it. So we're still focused on philosophy of religion for the moment, but we're continuing to make progress through our essays in the book. For now anyway, I guess have a great day, guys, and I'll see you back on Wednesday. If you need anything in terms of the questions or anything else between now and then, let me know. But for now, take it easy, and thanks so much for your help, attendance, and contribution to the class. Okay, guys, bye-bye then. I'll see you soon. Thank you.